episode. The focus today, Ireland New Zealand is coming into sharp focus now. Friday night lights at the Aviva Stadium. Just a point of order, early doors. We are delighted, I must say, really thrilled. It's kind of a red letter day for us. Our first sponsor has come on board. Energia are going to be a big part of our rugby coverage all the way through until the end of 2025 and beyond, I'm sure, but all of next year and this autumn series. So Energia sponsors rugby, as I'm sure you know, in Ireland at all levels. Grassroots, obviously, the Energia AIL. Official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht, the Irish men's and women's team. The Energia Rugby for All initiative as well supports inclusion, welcoming everybody of all abilities to participate in the game. So right across the board, they're involved in Irish rugby, and now they're very much supporting rugby coverage in this podcast. So a warm welcome to them. And to learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships and to find out more about their exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. So again, warm welcome to them. It is great to have them on board for the rest of this year and across next year as well. Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent here in studio. Hello.
Hello, Joe.
And Ian Madigan, former Irish international, with us as well. Hey, Ian.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me on. Really enjoying the show so far. I've invested in a new microphone, really taking the podcasting seriously.
I see that. Listen, much obliged. So maybe just a temperature check on this rivalry is worth doing, and then we might talk about Twickenham, and that'll take us to the Aviva on Friday. I can't think of a bad game between these two in the last decade. The World Cup quarter-final just gone was an all-time epic. Intensity, the standard, the fitness levels, the dynamism which Ireland once upon a time would struggle with, it's all now very evenly matched and sky high on both sides. You look at it from a Kiwi perspective. So since Ireland's win in Chicago, Ireland have become just a major source of pain in the backside for them. If you're a 12, 13-year-old now, in your living memory, Ireland beat the All Blacks more often than not. That's just the way life is. 5 of the last 9, which is unthinkable, really. There was the series win in New Zealand in 22. Again, kind of unthinkable. Bit of a stain for those New Zealand players, a source of embarrassment perhaps. And there is no love loss. Sam Cane, for instance, told on that tour, "You're just a shit Richie McCaw." And I don't think it's a coincidence that last year in Paris, Cane was exceptional against Ireland. And then equally, if you think, it's one-way traffic of disdain. From an Irish perspective, for all the wins and all the backslapping, when it really counted, i.e. World Cup quarter-final, when it really counted, New Zealand had Ireland's number. And that is a very bitter, stark pill to swallow, but it's the truth. And then you have Rico Ioane at full-time, seconds into Johnny Sexton's retirement, telling him, "Enjoy your retirement, you see," in Sexton's book. So much for the All Blacks' famous no dickheads policy, and that's continued online. So they don't really like each other. They're evenly matched. On my temperature check-in, that's all-time high. We have a fever.
It's what you want, isn't it? The win in Chicago in 2016 was obviously such a historic day, beating them in Dublin then in the intervening years. But I think winning a series in New Zealand was the real, I suppose, kick in the teeth for the All Blacks. I was lucky enough to be on that tour a couple of years ago, and even thinking back to it now, it was just incredible, really, how Ireland turned it around. It was no coincidence that the All Blacks played the first test at Eden Park, where they're pretty much unbeatable. And once the All Blacks had won, there was talks of, there could be a whitewash here, 3-0. But that's not what happened. The second test win in Dunedin under the roof was phenomenal, and not to kind of, settle for a kind of a moral 2-1 defeat. Ireland backed it up in Wellington the next week, and the fallout from that, Joe, I was there, I think it was 2 or 3 days before I flew home after the third test. It was front page news. It was the leading the news stories on the TV. The pressure that was being piled on Ian Foster at the time was absolutely incredible. Ironically, for Scott Robertson, who now is the head coach, who we can get on and talk to. But I think that tour was the real, I suppose, the igniting of the rivalry. And isn't it brilliant that Ireland now have the respect of the All Blacks? I know it's kind of a bit of a cliche, but there was a time, and I remember when I started covering on the beat as well, that you could interview a couple of All Blacks the week of an Ireland game, and they would only list off, Brian O'Driscoll, maybe Sean O'Brien at a push. They just didn't really know the Irish players because they didn't feel like they had to. So I think in terms of a temperature check, this rivalry is amazing. I think all that needle you mentioned, Joe, between Peter O'Mahony, Sam Cane, Johnny Sexton, Rico Ioane, like, as much as people can poo-poo it and say we don't want this in our game, we absolutely do, and it adds another layer of intrigue to Friday night. And what a way to start the Autumn Nations series.
I saw Jerry Thornley in his piece. He mentioned the Six Nations website, Ian. Which no skin in the game really, but they were saying, because you sometimes wonder, well, is it just Irish people who think that this rivalry is at an all-time high? And the Six Nations website said it's hard to argue against this fixture being the most electrifying rivalry in rugby today. And they talk about a series of grudge matches filled with breathtaking tries, controversies, and a fair amount of animosity.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're number one in the world, everyone wants to be your rival, and they want to say that, we're the team that you still want to beat.
Hang on, neither of these are number one in the world.
Well, Ireland are officially.
Yeah, but like real world, where everyone's so it's interest. South Africa are just so obviously number one. France, New Zealand, Ireland are wrestling it out, I would say, Ian. Is that not how you see it?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I'd agree with your view on South Africa. But we are number one in the world, and happy to shout about that off the rooftops. Look, it was very interesting for me when in the lead up to that quarter final, the messaging coming out of the All Blacks camp, and it went from this kind of superiority mindset to then what they said in the media was, you only need to be the best on the day. And full credit to them, they were the best on the day. But that is a very different mindset to how New Zealand would have had in the lead up to previous Irish games, leading into, let's say, 2016, for example. And that change in mindset of maybe saying, look, are Ireland a better team than us? Maybe they are, but we need to find out a way to beat them on the day. And ultimately they did that. And that has fueled this rivalry massively, because had they lost that game, you would have been looking at losing the last two tests in the All Blacks in New Zealand, and then losing the quarter final. Leading into this game, the rivalry wouldn't be as big as it is. Whereas now you've got suddenly scores to settle. The Ioane stuff that's come out has definitely added a bit of salt and pepper to it, which is great for us as analysts. But there's also like players on the park that have a big point to prove. If you look at it and some of the matchups and how the Ireland players came out and how we would have perceived them going into that game, the reality is Porter Lomax. Porter was the one who was getting penalised at the scrum, and that's all that really matters on the day. Van der Fleer and the All Blacks captain who's slipped one out. Sorry, not Surveyor. Surveyor Doris, was another matchup, and Surveyor would have edged Doris in that quarter final as well. And then Van der Fleer and Sam Cane.
Sam Cane,
Van der Fleer is going in as World Player of the Year previously, and Cane was struggling for form and definitely under pressure as New Zealand captain, and he pulled out probably the performance of his career in that quarter final. So you've got those three really big matchups, and then you throw Ioane Ringrose into the mix, where Gary will want to be getting one up on him for his old mate in Johnny. That certainly adds fuel to it all.
Okay. Well, let's go to the Aviva Friday via Twickenham on Saturday, where England just lost out against New Zealand 22 points to 24. George Ford hit the post with a penalty, and then he sent a drop goal wide late on as well. So very easily could have been an English win. Just in broad terms, Ian, give us the view on what you made of New Zealand.
I wasn't overly impressed with them. I found at one stage I was thinking, is it two really good teams going at it here, or is it two pretty average teams that have ended up in a really good contest? New Zealand kicked the ball a huge amount, and it's one of the big misconceptions with them. We think they played this kind of running, offloading game. It's not the case. Barrett playing at out half, I think he kicked the ball more than he passed it. Defensively, they are vulnerable, and keen to kind of dive into that and how I expect Ireland to expose that on Friday night. And look, England really blew a gilt-edged opportunity to win that match. I think they made a pre-planned substitution at halfback with 15 minutes to go. One of these decisions that a coach kind of maps out on his iPad before a game. This is the times I'm going to make my substitutions, regardless of the context of the match. And it changed the game. Randall and Ford were poor when they came on. The New Zealand substitutions, especially in the front row, made a big impact. And full credit to Mackenzie, who's most likely going to be starting now with Barrett injured, played well in the final quarter. They started to get that front foot ball, and that's the key with Mackenzie at out half. For me, when his team isn't getting front foot ball, he's quite rash. He can make a lot of mistakes. He can go for low percentage plays, and that's the pressure that Ireland would be looking to put him under. But he came on when the game was kind of breaking up. In the final 20 minutes, his team was beginning to get on top of the English pack, and he was able to impose his game onto England.
Okay, and we should say for Friday night, Cian, that Richie Mo'unga, still only 29, is off playing in Japan, so he's not available. Though I somehow suspect Scott Robertson is going to tempt him home over the next year or two. Bowden Barrett head injury, so it will be Mackenzie on Friday. Do you agree with Ian? Is that a good thing for Ireland? Mackenzie's a lovely player.
He's a brilliant player, but I think he's exactly the type of player you want coming off the bench, just as he did at the weekend. Obviously, he nailed the penalty from long range, and he also nailed the touchline conversion. And his place kicking has been a bit hit and miss, particularly in the rugby championship. So I would say Ireland would prefer to be coming up, and I'm kind of hesitant to use that language, against Damien Mackenzie rather than Bowden Barrett, because even think back to the All Blacks 15 game at the RDS a couple of years ago. Damien Mackenzie was running riot. He is one of the best broken field runners in the world, but I think where the question marks hang over him, and I think this is why Scott Robertson went back to Bowden Barrett for Twickenham last week, was those really tight test games, and Ian has touched on it there. Does he have the kicking game and the controlling manner to put the All Blacks in the right places? And you mentioned Richie Mo'unga, Joe, and I think Scott Robertson has already tried to get him back. I mean, did they win 7 Super Rugby titles together with the Crusaders? And I mentioned this about Ian Foster and the pressure he was under in 22 when Ireland won on tour. I think a lot of people, mostly the Kiwi public, looked at Scott Robertson and what he did with the Crusaders and thought that when he takes over the All Blacks, it was just going to be a magic potion and everything was going to be good. But I think what we've seen over the course of the Rugby Championship, in the couple of games that they've played around it against England on tour, they played Japan a couple of weeks ago, is that they're actually going through a pretty big transition. When Ian Foster took over from Steve Hansen, he would have been an assistant coach, so there was continuity there, whereas Scott Robertson has come in, brought in his own coaching staff, his own ideas, and they're still trying to figure it out, particularly at half back. I think scrum half has been a bit of an issue. Look, they're trying to replace a lot of legendary figures. You have Aaron Smith, who's now retired, Brodie Retallick, Sam Whitelock. I mean, you're talking about some of the greats of New Zealand rugby, and I think it's had a knock-on effect because they've been trying to play Bowden Barrett at fullback and Damien Mackenzie as this double playmaker, but now they've moved to Will Jordan, who is one of the best players in the world. They just want to get him on the ball more often, and he has looked good at fullback. But I think the mixed messaging around going back to Bowden Barrett for Twickenham was indicative of, I think, an All Blacks team who were still trying to figure out which way they're going and how they're trying to play under Scott Robertson. And look, while they haven't been at their best in the Rugby Championship against England in that series, I think you just look at the quality of tries that they scored at the weekend, and they're still the All Blacks team who can rip you apart in the blink of an eye. Look at the way Bowden Barrett exposed Ellis Genge in the fringe of that ruck for Will Jordan's try. Look at Wallace Atiti's offload. Look at Martelea's two finishes. You won't see two better finishes than that. So even though they might not be a vintage crop of All Blacks, as they showed against Ireland in the quarterfinal, they can still hurt you.
No, for sure. There's a sense Talea hasn't been in great form, but that really marked a return to form, and I agree totally on the way Barrett spotted Genge on his own.
Brilliant.
In a 3v3 and said, okay, Jordan, you're with me. And in we go, and it was a great try. I suppose the kicking, to be fair, England post Felix Jones are very much persevering with the rush defence, and unexpected sources. I mean, you have Surveyor getting the ball and doing little pop kicks over that rush defence. So it's I know you said Ireland will move to that type of defence. There were times where I thought, God, New Zealand are really like this rush defence because they can pop one over and then the game is open and all their dynamism and their runners and their handling skills come to the fore, and the game is kind of a little bit chaotic, which suits them down to the ground in some respects.
Yeah, they certainly like attacking off unstructured play, and if that comes from, let's say, a short restart that you take and you win it back and the defence isn't set in a traditional way that they're practicing week in, week out in training. And it's the same if you do a chip kick, you don't have the combinations that you can find typically off, let's say, a set piece when the ball goes to width and you've got one of your centres on either side and your back row in the middle of the field and your front five close to the ruck all protected. That's where you want to ideally catch that front five in the middle of the pitch. And you think back to that quarter final, a big play was when one of the Barr brothers chipped it over in the middle of the field, regathered, and they scored off the next phase. And Cian, you touched on it there. The New Zealand's ability to score quickly is huge because it manages the energy of the team. It's not heavy on fuel. And again, referring back to the quarter final, the try that they scored in the second half off the line out 30 meters out from their own try line to score in one phase when it was taking Ireland 10, 15, 25 phases to get 3 points, 5 points, 7 points. And they did it again against England, as you said, 3-phase power play. Like the switch with Jordan was a pre-planned move. They've spotted where the front rower in Genge is defending. They know who the negative 10 is and that he's slow to fold, and you put your two fastest guys on that side and you expose it. Like they're a very good coaching team, and Robertson's very creative, and they do have plenty of smart players, but I still think Ireland are going to be able to impose their game on New Zealand, both in defence and attack.
Well, let's talk about Ireland's attack then, because you referenced you saw issues with the New Zealand defence, and we had a brief chat by WhatsApp just before coming on, and you made the point on New Zealand that they are man watchers, not ball watchers, and the best defensive coaches you've had talked about 80-20 rule. So 80% of your focus on the man and 20% of your focus watching what the ball is doing. You feel the Kiwis are more 90% watching the man, 10% on the ball, and so that means when they get the right hit, it's very impactful, but on a number of occasions it means they don't get any hit.
Yeah, exactly that. When they get it right, the hit is bigger because they're more man focused. They can put all their energy and their body angles into driving through the attacking player. When they get it wrong, and Brian O'Driscoll was the best in the world at this, in letting the ball do the work. So if you're defending and your eyes are up and you're concentrating on who you're marking, and they get up to speed moving laterally either inside or outside you before they've received the ball, if you're man focused, it can catch you off guard. If you have late deception at the line. So Ireland did it unbelievably well against South Africa for those two tries where you crowd the space with 3-4 bodies. It was Kelleher who went clean through off an inside ball where he'd hidden behind Cian Healy in the first test, and it was Osborne who went through off Crowley. Again, he'd hidden behind one of the Irish attackers and it nearly intercepting the ball off his own player. What that does, if you're man focused, is you're thinking you're defending a certain player, and if you're not keeping a 20% focus on the ball and there's late movement at the line, it can catch you off guard. It can create a soft shoulder, give you an offload opportunity. And then the other side of it is you're massively dependent on the defenders inside you moving forward and forcing the attacking player in possession to play the ball off the line. If you don't get that line speed on the interior, you can end up in front of the ball. And 3 or 4 times in that England game, we saw New Zealand defenders tackling players who weren't in possession of the ball. And that's an immediate penalty. And if you do that 2-3 times, typically you will see a yellow card. We didn't see it at the weekend. So I saw enough green shoots in the Irish attack to how they exposed the South African front five. What the Irish analysts and coaches will be doing is finding the New Zealand players who are the biggest man watcher offenders and looking to find out where they're going to be on 3rd, 4th, 5th phase and looking to expose them with deception late at the line and Jack Crowley playing square and flat.
Right. Very interesting. Keane, something we should touch on. If people didn't see the game, I mean, it was again, Ian, was it a great contest or two great teams? Maybe somewhere in between. But it was interesting in that, one, the referee was speaking to the Twickenham crowd at large, right, NFL style. But two, there are new rules being trialled, obviously, at this during this series. One of them, which I think had a very tangible impact in the game, is that they're clamping down on dodgy escort lines. Escort lines is it's one of the great euphemisms. There's no escort about it. I always remember being at the Ireland-England game in 2019 at the start of that World Cup year, which obviously did not go well for Ireland ultimately. And England did a number on Ireland across the board that day. But one of the ways they really did a number was destroying Ireland's box kick. And their escort lines were off the charts good. Kick would go up, Irish chasers would go in chase, and English bodies were not letting them through. You were having no access to the ball. It was just, effectively, it's obstruction. Mm-hmm. And so World Rugby said, we want to end that now. And we saw on numerous occasions on Saturday, you could see players thinking, should I step across that chaser's line? And then not doing it because they know now the punishment is more severe and will be picked up upon. So one, we saw more box kicks, which may not be music to some people's ears. We saw more box kicks, but you could argue the upside is we saw more legitimate contests and possession suddenly won 20 metres up the field. It's a small sample size, that one game. Is this a thing now? Will all the coaches be saying, hey, the box kick is back in a big way here?
Well, I hope not to the detriment of the attacking rugby and some of the stuff that Ian has just brilliantly outlined there. Yeah, like I don't see Ireland going to a box kick heavy approach because it's not the makeup of their DNA. And it's not playing to the strengths of the team that they have. What it does is it puts a premium on a really solid fullback. I mean, Rob Kearney is one who springs to mind. Like he would have, been absolutely brilliant in that scenario. But Hugo Keenan is excellent in the air as well. Jamie Osborne did a really good job in South Africa, but Hugo Keenan is still one of the best operators in the world. And you've seen that in the few games that he's played for Leinster coming back. But I don't see Ireland going back to the sort of box kick heavy approach that we would have seen at times under Joe Schmidt, because if you were doing that, you're taking out you're nullifying the influence of Jamison Gibson Park, who, particularly in light of Johnny Sexton's retirement, is one of, if not Ireland's most important player in terms of their attack. And that's going to be one of the most fascinating things to watch over the course of the next month, Joe, I don't think it will be an evolution, might be a bit of a strong word, but what tweaks are we going to see in Ireland's attack? Look, Andy Farrell is still the man who oversees Ireland attacking play, but obviously you've Andrew Goodman, who's come in now from Leinster instead of Mike Catt, and he has some very clever intricate plays around 5 metre taps, about line-out plays. He was brilliant at Leinster for that, and Ian has touched on a couple of the moves that Ireland used in South Africa to score the tries. I would fully expect him to have a few variations on that, so that's something that I'm really keen to see as well.
Ian, what do you think on the box kick point? Because it's worth saying in Joe Schmidt's defence, Johnny Sexton talked about it just recently in his book, it wasn't like Joe Schmidt loved box kicks. He just identified this at that particular moment in international, the test arena, that there was, one, Ireland were good at it, but two, like it was paying dividends. Like they hadn't been doing it in the same way at Leinster. Would you be thinking we might, this is now an avenue where, like, God, we're good in the air. The escort lines aren't going to be blocked. Well, let's bloody use this more. Or are you more in Keane's camp? Let's not take away our MO at the moment.
No, I'd agree with your point and Keane's point. But I think if you can, well, first off, on the point on Joe, as a head coach, you're looking for an edge.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's going to be pretty or ugly, you're looking for an edge, and if you're going to get it, you're going to take it. And it served Ireland in good stead. If you can get up and compete for box kicks and create breaking ball, so go up with one hand is always going to beat two in the air. Okay, if you're not even trying to catch it. If you catch it, it's a bonus. But you're just looking to create breaking ball, Aussie rules style. And if you're well drilled in the players that you can get around that space, you're going to increase your percentage of getting that ball back. The opportunity that then gives you is you're attacking off unstructured, like what we've just spoken about. Yeah. Unstructured attack is what you want. The opposition defensive team are all over the place. And if you can practice that in training and find your shape quicker as an attacking team, you can expose the defense. I'm personally a big fan of this rule change. It was getting absolutely ridiculous, the escorting that we were seeing. there was times when you were seeing 3 or 4 players creating effectively a wall in front of the catcher. Like, that's not a contest. It's like rugby union. It is all about a contest. We want that as a spectacle. So the changes that you will see from a technique point of view, if you're in the backfield, and as I touched on there, one hand is going to beat 2. If you're the running from the team that's made the box kick, you're just looking to create breaking ball. Yes. The technique you want to do is you want to jump past the ball and use your body as a shield to prevent the oncoming catcher from getting up with one hand. So you can be guaranteed that that's something that Ireland are working on. We are the best catchers in the world. We always have been. Probably our roots in Gaelic football helping us there. But I think it can definitely be a weapon for us. Gibson Park's box kicking is excellent, and he can put it on a sixpence to give guys an opportunity to get up and compete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Watch that.
I think in fairness, just a quick point on that, Joe, in fairness to Joe Schmidt, he was working with Conor Murray, who was undoubtedly the best box kicker in the world, so it would have been mad not to utilise that skill. I think that's a point worth making as well.
Yeah. We should just mention, by the way, and we'll segue more into the Irish angle on this game in a moment, but like, there's sort of a star is born this year quality to 22-year-old Wallace Atiti at number 6 for New Zealand. He's only played 7 times. Born in Samoa. He was in the Chiefs training panel until last year. He only made his Chiefs debut in February. And now suddenly, you know, he's walking off with the player of the match at Twickenham. He's had a great rugby championship. I mean, in the game, I was watching with the volume down at one point, and there was this break. And I was like, who did that? Who's playing at centre today? I just wasn't sure, because I was like, it's Ioane, who's that? And then you see the 6 on his back. And oh my God. And he just continued the dynamism, the footwork close to the line, always looking for an offload. And like an amazing backstory as well, Wallace TT. He was born in Samoa. His dad was the former Samoan captain, Simo CTT. And he lived in Scotland for the first 5 years of his life because his dad was playing for Newcastle and the Borders. And he's called Wallace because his dad loved Braveheart. I mean, if that sounds like it's made up, it's not. He just loved William Wallace and Braveheart and was living in Scotland at the time. So hence we have 22-year-old Wallace playing for New Zealand now at number 6. And God, you know, I mean, it's exciting. So suddenly, and I saw Jeff Wilson made the point, don't think Artie Surveyor is not in good form, even though people are saying it. He's now more kind of central to the combative areas and fighting hard for the team, and it's letting Satiti kind of on the fringes unleash hell and carnage carrying the ball. So Surveyor's doing a big job there. So suddenly you have Kane, who I suspect still remembers the comment from Peter O'Mahony, Artie Surveyor, and now I think world at his feet superstar at 22 coming to town. So this back row battle is going to be incredible.
Yeah, well, Wallace Atiti is, for anyone who hasn't seen much of him yet, I mean, and anyone who's lucky enough to be going to the game on Friday night, like, just player cam this guy for a couple of minutes. He is sensational. You would have seen the bits and pieces, like you mentioned, Joe, at the weekend, and he's kind of, burst onto the scene out of nowhere, really. That 6th position was a bit of a problem position for the All Blacks over the last couple of years. You remember back, they were playing Scott Barrett there, who's obviously moved into more his preferred second row now. They've had guys like Akira Ioane, Hoskins Satutu, who just haven't really kicked on to what was expected of them. Shannon Frizzell played at the World Cup, but he's now gone to Japan with Richie Mwanga. And now all of a sudden they've unearthed, he only just turned 22, I think, a couple of weeks ago.
September, yeah.
And what it's done is, apart from giving the back row a whole new dynamic, and you touched on Artie Surveyor, then I don't think Artie Surveyor has hit the heights that he did at last year, particularly in the World Cup. He was unbelievably good in that quarter-final win over Ireland. But I think it's taken the pressure off Artie Surveyor now, and what it's going to do is it's probably going to focus teams' mind more on Wallace Atiti, where you cannot forget about Artie Surveyor as well. So that's going to be very interesting to see how Ireland go about, I think, shutting down that back row. It's interesting that they've gone back to Sam Cane because he's leaving at the end of the season as well. So the fact that they have called him shows that they're probably missing an out-and-out 7 as well to take over the mantle from him. But in terms of Satiti, Joe, I think himself and Sasha Feinberg, Mgama Zulu, the two of them are going to be, I think, looking for the breakthrough star at the end of the year. They're both absolutely just a joy to watch.
Yeah. So, sorry, come in by all means, but I was going to ask you, so this is simplistic thinking, I'm sure, but so in my head I'm thinking, okay, Ireland on Friday, we're starting to really like Tyg Byrne at 6. Do we need Ryan Baird in the back? Do we need more dynamism suddenly with this guy?
That's exactly how I was thinking.
Okay.
So Satiti is power and pace. That's what you get with him. Tyg is a fantastic line-out operator. He's very good on the ground, but power and pace isn't his game. Okay, and to an extent, Peter Mahoney is similar. In the earlier parts of his career, there was definitely more power and pace. I'm not saying he's lost at all, but if you were to compare him to Satiti, they're different. Baird is in the same conversation as Satiti. He is power and pace. Maybe not as good a line-out operator as a Mahoney, and certainly not as good on the ground, but he will bring. And another thing that Baird brings particularly well is line speed at 30, third defender out, forcing the ball player to play early. And then the balance then as well is like Joe McCarthy suddenly becomes really, really important then. If you were to play Tyg Byrne, then Joe McCarthy has to start, and obviously there's more pressure on Doris. Whereas if you play Baird, then you've got McCarthy, Baird and Doris as really dynamic ball carriers and really dynamic tacklers, but not necessarily poaching threats, and not as good in the line-out.
Okay. Quite a lot to balance out there.
The line-out is going to be massive, Joe, because Cody Taylor has been ruled out with a head injury with Bowden Barrett. So that means Asafa Mua is going to be starting at hooker. And while he is an unbelievable ball carrier, the punch that he brings off the bench is phenomenal. But he is not as strong a line-out operator as Cody Taylor. So I would imagine that the Irish line-out has had its issues. For sure, but I think with Cody Taylor being out, that is an area they're going to go after, I think, on the All Blacks ball. So
that would lead you to think, well, we want 3 big line-out options.
I think so, and
therefore you'd go with Byrne at 6.
I think so, and I think because it worked so well in that second test, and I know the Springboks are a different kind of proposition to the All Blacks, but just on the point of Ryan Baird, I think a lot of people were expecting or hoping that the South Africa tour might have been the kind of changing of the guard, and we would have seen Ryan Baird, become Ireland 6, and it didn't quite happen. And he got an injury in the Lions game a couple of weeks ago, or he went off a cramp, I should say. He hasn't really lit it up, I would say, this season either. Now, you could argue that neither has Tyg Byrne. He's been part of a struggling Munster team, but I still think you're talking about one of the best operators in the world, and my sense would be that you'd probably want a Tyg Byrne there to go after that All Blacks line. Not that Ryan Baird couldn't do it either, but I think the bench, the makeup of the bench is going to be really telling as well, because like I said, the All Blacks are going to be missing a lot of guys from that.
Okay, we'll talk Ireland in a bit more detail in just a moment. Cian, just give us the lowdown. What is the story with our injury situation? Because the front row seem to be wobbling, or certainly hooker. Where are we?
Yeah, I'm kind of mindful of the fact that some people might listen to this after the team has been named tomorrow. But certainly last week, I was hearing that Ronan Kelleher was certainly in a race to be fit, despite what was kind of coming out of the Ireland camp. So I think clearly a lot hinges on his fitness. If he's fit, you'd imagine he starts. If he doesn't, I think Dave Heffernan is probably in pole position, considering Rob Herring hasn't played yet this season. So that would be a huge task for Dave Heffernan, who hasn't played actually since the 22 tour to New Zealand. So great comeback story. He's been playing well. But I think Ireland will want to be giving Ronan Kelleher every opportunity to prove his fitness in time, particularly with Dan Sheehan ruled out, Do
you have a feel of what his line-out throwing's like?
Kelleher's?
Heffernan's,
I wouldn't say it's his major strong point, and especially he's been out of the system for a while, but he's match sharp, he's match fit. I think that has to count for a lot. In fairness, Rob Herring has never let Ireland down, and his super strength, and Ian would certainly know more about this than me, having played with him, is his line out throwing. So do you risk a guy, if Kelleher isn't fit, who hasn't played at all this season, throwing him into the pitch of an All Blacks game from the start? I'm not sure. Do you try and give him 20 minutes off the bench? What do you think, Ian?
I'd agree with you, and I'd go with Heffernan over Herring, just purely on not being match ready to be going. And there's also, if it was one player that wasn't match ready going into this, I wouldn't be as concerned with that individual selection at hooker. But the reality is there's a large part of that Irish 15 haven't accumulated many match minutes. the likes of Joe McCarthy, another good example. And this New Zealand team are fully dialed up off the back of the Rugby Championship. They've played Japan, they've played England. These guys are ready to go.
So I guess, well, to Cian's point, many people will listen to this after the team announcement on Wednesday afternoon. We've touched on the dilemma for the Irish coaching ticket around the dynamism of that New Zealand back row and where they put Tyke Byrne and whether Ryan Baird comes in or doesn't, and the ramifications for Lineout. So there's a lot going on there. They'll have to make a call at hooker. And then does Mac Hansen come straight in for Nash? Ian, give us a sense of how you think those conversations are happening amongst the Irish coaching ticket. Where is Hansen at the moment?
I think off the back of his World Cup form, yes. But that's a good year ago now. I think that the shoulder injury Hansen had last year was a nasty one. He's had an okay start to the season. He doesn't look physically as good as he was in and around the World Cup, certainly not as sharp in beating defenders, maybe not quite having the confidence that he had in getting over the ball to go for poaches or to counter, to barge in those exterior rucks. I think Nash has actually been one of the bright shoots in that Munster team. As a winger if a winger's performing well in a team that's struggling, it's a very good sign. I really like him down the right. He's rock solid. He's good in the air. He works really hard. There's no doubt when Mac Hansen is at his best, he adds an additional layer to that Irish attack. His ability to get in as a second set of hands and beat defenders in the middle of the field. He's up there with the very best in the world. But I think they'll stick with Nash, and I think we'll see Hansen come in later on in the autumn series.
Okay, interesting. I mean, the kind of the cadence of the November isn't ideal, really, that Ireland are coming in their first game in several months and it's against New Zealand first. I mean, ideally you'd like the strongest team maybe to come second or fourth and you can adjust accordingly. Me and Cian obviously haven't experienced it, Ian. How difficult is it when you're against a team who've had a big run out at Twickenham, another run out against Japan for what it's worth, and a busy summer, and you're trying to pick things up after several months and hit the ground running? In modern rugby, is that far more doable for Ireland, or is this a genuine disadvantage?
It definitely is a disadvantage. There's no getting away from that. But there's good continuity with this Irish team from the summer tour. Last season Six Nations into the summer tour into this year's autumn internationals. The injury profile of the squad is good, barring hooker, and they've had plenty of time together. It's not like they've come into camp, let's say last Saturday before Friday game. They've had plenty of time in Portugal to sharpen their sword, and I think there will be a big focus from Ireland to play a high percentage game early on in the game, work their way into it, and I think once you get that first 5-10 minutes under your belt, you'll be fine. But as we saw in the World Cup, you certainly don't want to give New Zealand a 13 or 14 point head start. They're not the team to do it to.
Yeah. Just on the build-up to the game, Cian, the media preliminaries, we took the temperature check at the start of the podcast and it's sky high. Media preliminaries this week, ice cold. Ireland are still in Portugal.
Hopefully they're not ice cold. They're in warm weather.
Yeah, they're fine. So it's all easy breezy over there, and it's just not the same, I think, doing things on Zoom. It's a very different proposition. And then New Zealand yesterday, Jason Holland spoke, the assistant coach, won't be applying for the Munster job. And then Caleb Clarke was sent out for, I think, like a 5-minute charm offensive. I mean, he has scored 13 tries in 26 games for New Zealand on the wing. But he was talking about, we can't help but notice your name is Clarke. And so descendants arrived in Samoa from Ireland in the 20s and started potato farming. Northern Ireland is as much as he knows in terms of his roots. It's probably why I like Guinness, he smiled. And back on the bus. So whatever about the Rico Ioane stuff kind of bubbling away and this rivalry being somewhat acrimonious, no sign of that yet thus far in the media.
No, and it's probably because they've had such limited dealings, and I suppose a Friday night game means that there's probably less access as well. I was talking to Rory O'Connor and Murray Kinsella, who were both there yesterday, and I think the media ran like over an hour late. The bus was literally running as Caleb Clarke was doing his 4-minute interview. So look, that's kind of the access that you're talking about. And you're right, Joe, we had a Zoom call on Sunday with Andrew Goodman and 3 Ireland players, but when you're not in and around the squad, it's very hard to gauge a proper temperature of where things are at. So I think they're due to fly home today. Andy Farrell will do a press conference tomorrow and Wednesday after the team announcement, and that's the only press conference they'll have done in person in the 2-week kind of build up to the All Blacks game. So yeah, look, we'll see. Like one of those players who was up on Sunday was Joe McCarthy, and we did a piece in the paper and today with him, and he was making the point that their no excuses culture means that they fully expect to hit the ground running. And I think one guy who's going to be key to that, and it probably flew under the radar when it happened during the summer, was getting Aled Walters, the head of performance, strength and conditioning coach, essentially from England. Like, this guy is one of the best in the business. Worked with Munster, worked with South Africa when they won the World Cup. Like I said, flew under the radar, but that was a massive acquisition for the RFU to get him back. This will be his first camp working with the Ireland players, but I think having a guy like that in your corner and trying to hit the pitch of what's coming is brilliant. Like Joe McCarthy mentioned, Paul O'Connell's mall sessions have kind of become famous. They've almost become like Stuart Lancaster's Tuesday sessions. What was he saying? Joe McCarthy used the word tasty. Paulie's tasty mall session. So, from my understanding, it's kind of when the shackles get released and two packs go at it, hammer and tongs, with Paul O'Connell in the middle of it, screaming manic aggression and whatever else. So, you would love to be a fly on the wall to see one of those sessions. So, I would say that they won't see it as an issue, and they'll actually probably enjoy maybe being that little bit fresher than the All Blacks now. Could be coming to regret saying that come 10 o'clock on Friday night.
No, it's interesting. There are two ways to look at it. Before we wrap up and get some predictions as well, Ian, you've mentioned the World Cup quarterfinal several times because it's fresh in your mind, because you decided to sit down and watch it again this week. So a year on, what's your big takeaway from it?
Yeah, I reluctantly got the laptop out and watched it. It was like looking back on my leaving cert. I knew the result was going to be bad, but it brought back some fond memories of school. And look, the World Cup, it was amazing, and this team captured our hearts, no doubt about it. I remember a conversation with my dad leading into the New Zealand game, and he asked me, who do you think's going to win? And I was very confident. I said Ireland. I think we'll win well. I think for us to lose, a lot has to go wrong, and the reality is a lot did go wrong. Our lineout was poor on the day. Our scrum gave up a huge amount of penalties. They scored a first phase try from 30 metres out from their own try line. Our goal kicker missed a kick from 30 metres out, relatively in front of the post. A lot of stuff did go wrong, and we nearly got, even referencing Kelleher being held up over the line, when I'm sure for him to get that one down, he would have been trading at about 1 to 100, as that maul was charging towards the New Zealand line. A lot did go wrong, and we still nearly beat them. I think we're going to rectify a lot of those problems this week, and I'm very confident that Ireland will win this week and win well.
Win well, right.
Yeah.
What's well?
I think we'll win by more than 7 points.
Okay.
I'm going to say Ireland between 7 and 15.
Okay. And
8 and 15.
So say for a second, hooker, lineout doesn't go well. New Zealand scrum was good against England, illegal or otherwise. So say lineout and scrum are sketchy again. And by the way, a lot of Ireland's wins have come with Johnny Sexton at 10. You'd start to be a little bit less bolshy, would you?
Yeah, I think we'll get parity at scrum time, and I think our lineout will shore itself up.
Okay. And then,
it'll be interesting to see what selection they go with there. Are they going to go with more lineout operators or more power? And Kelleher's an interesting, if it is Heffernan, that is another interesting one, because Sheehan and Kelleher are particularly good ball carriers. You're then talking about, well, we can manage Tig at 6 because we've got Sheehan at hooker. So that is one that I'll be keeping a really close eye on. The other one is of interest is obviously Goodman coming in as the backs coach, which you touched on. Bundy Aki and his age profile, he was without doubt Ireland's best player in the World Cup. I think Goodman will be a very good coach for him. Helping him get, stay connected to the game, get his hands in the ball more, organize those wider shapes better. But it will be interesting to see, if Farrell does want to get, test young guys out like Baird and Osborne, doing it in a really big game like this is the best way to find out. And maybe we could see some surprises at 12 and 6, so he can find out how these guys get on at test level. And having seen Osborne, he certainly looks like he belongs at test level.
Okay. Cian, final word, do you share Ian's optimism?
Optimistic, definitely not as confident as Ian. I think the scrum battle is going to be absolutely huge. Ethan de Groot should be back for the All Blacks. He missed last week due to disciplinary issues, and he's a pretty meaty loose head. And look, like it or not, there is still a perception around Andrew Porter and his boring in and his scrummaging. We've seen that again for Leinster this season. It seems to just be in referees' heads. So if that happens early on and the tone is set, like that could be a very difficult day. Ian touched on Tyrell Lomax, and you've got a Safa Mua. Like, they are three big boys in the front row. Who is going to be playing hooker? Like, that has a big impact, obviously, on the scrum too. So that would be a slight concern. Ireland's lineout has still been an issue. We've seen that the All Blacks went after it. Ian touched on, the quarter final last year, and let's remember that the All Blacks actually beat Ireland in the 2019 quarter final as well, which we, I know we'd like to forget that, but that first phase try that they conceded was like just such an un-Andy Farrell like thing to happen in an Irish team. It was jarring, actually. I actually watched the match back as well, like Ian, for my sins yesterday.
What's wrong with you two?
I know, too much time.
There's life to be lived out there, guys.
I know, but it
wasn't enjoyable.
No, it wasn't. But that try, Ian, you're right to highlight it. That was just so jarring from an Andy Farrell side. So I'd be optimistic, though, all that said, Joe, for the things we've said. It's not a vintage All Blacks team. I think Damien McKenzie can be got at out half. I would imagine Caelan Doris, who, by the way, we haven't mentioned, is playing such good rugby. Looks like the captaincy is sitting really well with him. It's his first game as, I suppose, official Ireland captain.
I would think he is itching to rectify the Surveyor battle.
Yeah, and Surveyor comfortably came out on top of him in that quarter final. And I think Ian mentioned Bundy Aki there. I think he is going to have a key role to play as well in going after Damien McKenzie defensively, because look, for all his qualities, he's not the biggest guy in that 10 channel, and he's brave to a fault. He will throw himself in front of anything, but that is an area where Ireland can get after them. So if the set piece, the scrum and the line out holds up, I'd be optimistic that Ireland can win, Joe, but not with Ian's level of confidence.
Okay. Very good. Scene beautifully set. We are going to talk rugby again on Thursday, by the way. Andrew Trimble's going to come into the studio and Rory O'Connor's going to join us. So plenty more rugby teams will be announced, and we'll be building up to the game on Friday. Thanks again to Energia, who are very much on board now as our rugby sponsors. And so our coverage of the autumn series is brought to you with thanks to Energia. Cian Tracey, writing about this all week in the Irish Independent. Thanks a mil.
Cheers, Joe.
Ian Madigan, great to have you on. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Cian.
Cheers,
guys.
Brilliant, fellas. Thanks so much.